Maayong gabi kaninyong tanan and welcome to another episode of Partners in Law. This is sponsored by the Cebu Lady Lawyers Association in cooperation with the Philippine Earth Justice Center Incorporated. So for this evening's discussion, we're really glad to meet you again and discuss some of the environmental concerns and issues, putting into the picture how environmental laws play a vital role in the conservation of our ecosystem. So I will be your host for this evening. I am Attorney Kristine Argallon. I am the Litigation and Advocacy Officer of the Philippine Earth Justice Center. So maayong gabi kaninyong tanan. And for this evening's discussion, it will be a very interesting discussion because we will be talking about the river ecosystems here in Cebu City. As we all know, in the past few months, especially that, when we are entering the rainy season, it's always been a problem here in the city that we always encounter flooding and solid waste management issues related to urban rivers here in the city. So our discussion for this evening will be about the river rehabilitation of certain rivers here in Cebu City. I will be joined by our guest this evening. So allow me to introduce him. He is the Executive Director of the Soil and Water Conservation Foundation Incorporated. So help me welcome Mr. William Granet, or Bill Granet.
Good evening. I'm happy to be with you this evening.
Yes, we're also grateful that you could join us, even if, we're speaking on this very important and very interesting topic virtually. So I know this topic is quite close to your heart, and the work that you do in SWCF is really close to this. So before we start our discussion on the river rehabilitation projects here in Cebu City, would you tell us a little bit about your foundation?
Okay, well, the Soil and Water Conservation Foundation, or SWCF, it's known by its common name, has been in existence since 1988. So we're in our 32nd year. We've carried out a number of projects. I think it's almost 100 now in that 32-year period. We're an environmental NGO. We concentrate on environment, not so much in the urban areas, but more in the rural areas. One of the things is we like to follow our vision, which was made up in 1988. It says when a country loses its forests, it loses part of its soul. SWCF helps individuals and communities restore that soul. And we were thinking about it the other day, and we said it's probably even more true now than it was in 1988 because of the loss of the forest. Cebu is a prime example of that. Things begin to happen. And the ones who are affected most, of course, are the people who are living here. So anyway, we work with communities. We generally do not go out and implement a project without first consulting with the local residents to find out what their priorities are and what they want to do and what the major problems are in their area. And what happens then is that our team will go in there and we actually develop the project with them. So this is part of our efficacy about trying to get people to take ownership of their own project. So it's not SWCF doing it, and it's the people that do it. We just assist them.
Yeah, that's a really good initiative of the SWCF because community engagement and inclusivity in the project is really important, especially in the work that we do. Because as I've only worked for quite a short period of time in the environmental. It's like I'm still considered as a young lawyer here in the field, but it's really important to have not to impose things on the community, but learn from them and get their thoughts and input on the projects that we're doing in the community.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, they're always the ones directly affected by it.
Well, I think people forget who the real resource managers are. It's not us. It's not the government per se. It's not the Philippine Army or other armed force groups that if you surround an area, it doesn't do any good. It's the person who's sitting on the hillside with a bolo and determining, am I going to cut the tree down or am I not going to cut it down? So that's the real resource manager, or what they call the de facto resource manager. And sometimes we forget that and try to do things which, rather than teaching them to make better, more informed decisions, we try to impose our decisions on them.
Yeah. So you mentioned about more of the work that you do in rural communities. Which areas are communities that you're assisting or you're helping here in the Visayas?
Okay, well, right now we concentrate on Cebu and Bohol, but we've been on both sides of Negros. We've been in Region 10 and Region 11 in Mindanao. And we even tried one project in Bulacan, which we found out, we did a good job on it, but the logistics of working in Bulacan is very, very strenuous when you figure that our main office is here in Cebu. So we're mostly in the Visayas and parts of Mindanao, depending upon where we end up and where the requests come from.
Okay. So would you share with us and our televiewers some of the, maybe a few projects that you've done in these communities?
Okay, well, we worked for a number of years with Raja Sikatuna Protected Landscape, and this is one of the biggest limestone landscapes in the country. We worked with all but one of the 29 barangays. And in developing, we were looking at biodiversity conservation, but in many cases, unless you solve the problems with the stomachs of the people, you can't talk about saving the animals. So we do livelihood projects outside that help with that, and then at the same time work on the conservation aspects. We've also done when the previous governor was in office, we did a karst landscape management program. We found out that regardless of who's in office, most people don't understand what limestone is, or karst is the general term. And of course, 65% of Bohol and even a higher percentage here in Cebu is limestone. And people live on it, but they don't understand it. And that's the one that type of geology is going to be directly affected by climate change, and it's going to be a lot worse in some cases, mainly because that's where the water is, but the water is underground in many cases, not surface water. So those are two areas. We also we've developed cooperatives, and we work with putting up a federation of cooperatives. There are 15 in Bohol. And they just got a 6.5 million peso grant from the provincial government to work on free-range chickens with two other federations. So each one has a section. The pandemic has sort of put a little stall on that one, but eventually they'll come out with it. So what we like to say is that federation is actually much richer than the foundation, which I suppose is a good thing in the long run. So go ahead.
So, yes, those are really good initiatives, and I'd like to highlight the point that you mentioned earlier, that it's not just about putting them to action in environmental protection, but because they also have to think about survival and their livelihood. So it's good that the foundation, along with other partners, I guess, also support those kinds of initiatives in order for there to be a continuity of the advocacy in environmental protection.
Exactly. The many nations, what they call the first world countries, they talk about conservation, but they have the luxury of having a good economic base. In the Philippines and some of the other countries, the economic base is not that strong for most of the people. So again, if your focus is not on conservation, it's very hard to talk about it with the thing because people they're pointed in a different direction. So what we try to do is modify that direction a little bit, dealing with their local problems at the same time bringing in the conservation effort.
that's a holistic approach in pro, pushing for the advocacy and environmental protection, at the same time helping people become sustainable themselves, not just for themselves, but for their families and the communities that they're working. So like I mentioned earlier, our topic will be more directed toward the river situation here in Cebu City, because I think I shared this with you. The Philippine Earth Justice Center will be doing a little project on river rehabilitation here in the city. And we've noticed that, we have quite a lot of rivers here, especially those which are affecting the urban area here in the city. And we wanted to launch that campaign with a discussion on the river situation, the situation of the rivers here in Cebu City. And I think the SWCF, also worked on some projects related to river rehabilitation here in Cebu City.
Yeah, we did it was a 1-year project. It was supposed to be a 3-year project, but the funding slipped away from us. The funding agency had a different priority, but we started with the Butuanan River, which runs through Mandawi, but it actually has its headwaters in the Malubog area of Cebu City. So this is an interesting river because the upper part is in one jurisdiction, and the down side of it is in another jurisdiction. Unfortunately, Mandawi is receiving everything that comes down from the top of the mountain, so to speak. So it passes through it. So for those of you who have ever been to Paknaan, they used to have the dump site there, and the water. Let's say if I could walk on water, I could walk across the Butuanan River at that point. It was so filled with junk and whatnot, and it was completely black. You couldn't see below the surface. But at the headwaters, you could actually use the water for washing if you wanted to. I wouldn't drink it with a thing, but anyway, it was much clearer. But what happened was that as the river moved downhill, it picked up more and more trash and sewage and garbage and things that were thrown into the river. I must say, though, at one time, the industrial part of Mandawi City was dumping a lot into the river, but they've actually done a very good job of cleaning it up. So right now, from what I understand, is that sewage is one of the main problems because there is no sewage system per se in Mandawi. So one of the things people think, I have a septic tank in my house and my sewage goes into that and then it comes out and it's clean. It's not clean. It's not clean at all. It may be broken down and more liquid. But anyway, that water all leads to the Butuanan River for the part of the catchment that forms the lower part and eventually ends up in the river with all the effluent from heavy metals and from other things. And so right now, I guess nitrates are one of the main problems in the wells that they have along with it. And nitrate poisoning can be a very serious case. So there's lots of things going on in the Butuanan. We started a project. We were not the first. There were a number of efforts before us, and we built on that. We had very good cooperation from the Mandawi city government, and we had a point person assigned to us who was also a lawyer. So one of the things that we did is we had meetings with the barangay captains of those barangays that bordered the river and discuss what are the major problems and what are some of the solutions that might be taken into consideration. And they were very good. We came up with I won't say a master plan yet, but we came up with lots of ideas that in the long run could have been put in. At the same time, we were working with the schools and we were starting to do what we call a river watch program. So the high schools, especially along the river, are found in different barangays, not every barangay. And we were trying to get the students that would eventually set up a monitoring program. And there we would get institutions like the University of San Carlos Chemistry Department and the Water Resources Center and some of these other universities to go in there and assist in the collection of the data, along with DNR and the other line agencies that were collecting data this whole time. There have been a lot of interesting studies that have been done on the chemical composition of the river. And one of my favorite is they did the lead content of the mudfish. And most of you are familiar with mudfish. Usually comes from rice paddies and it's clean.
Yeah.
They actually had found mudfish that was living in the Butuanan River in the lower part. And they found heavy concentrations of lead throughout the body of the mudfish. And this was simply because of the diet of the mudfish. So there are lots of problems in there with heavy metals that you don't see. And you have the sewage on top of that. So anyways, there's lots of different problems came to light. But I think once people understand what the major problems are, and you have to make it a problem first before people begin to solve it. The thing we found that very early on in the foundation, talking about soil conservation. If it's not a problem, people are not going to worry about it. So when it becomes a problem, then they look for possible solutions, and there you can do the interventions to help them develop their own solutions and working with other barangays and within the city or the LGU itself.
Yeah, so that was a discussion mainly on the importance of coordination with different agencies, mainly the LGU, because you mentioned that Butuanan River crosses jurisdiction. It crosses both Mandaue City and Cebu City, so there needs to be like a coordination and collaboration of efforts between the two local government units with respect to how they would address the river situation in Butuanan River. And I think this is not just isolated, or this is not just this is something that's happening in Butuanan River, but also in many other river systems here in the city, mainly the Mahiga Creek or the Mahiga River, the Guadalupe River, the Bulacan River, and many other maybe smaller rivers or creek systems. And I think it's really important. It's important that you mentioned also that it's very crucial for people to understand the importance of the river ecosystems in order for them to have a greater appreciation on how to protect them and how to protect these ecosystems, especially that it affects urban communities. And I'd like to jump off from the last thing that you mentioned about consulting with barangays and the people in the community, because I think the people in the barangay are those who are really on the ground and they really see the actual things that are happening surrounding these areas. So what are some of the things that were raised by the barangay officials or maybe some of the watchers in the consultations that you had with them related to the river situation, especially in the Butuanan River?
Okay, well, I remember. Well, of course, trash was, I think, one of the major problems. They, even back when we were doing the project, each barangay was supposed to have their solid waste management program. So they were supposed to have a recovery facility within the barangay. Sometimes the facility ended up to be the river, especially by those people that it was easier to throw the stuff in the river than it was to bring it to the center of the barangay. So solid waste, trash, sewage is everybody's problem for the thing, because if you're in a poorer area, you may not have access to good toilets to begin with. So that means you're probably using the canal or some other facility. And that eventually gets washed into the river. One of the things we found out too is that not all the barangay captains were familiar with the environmental laws that govern river systems, or everybody builds on the easement. And I've seen that happen in many, many rivers here. It's either ignored or they don't realize that there's at least a 3-meter easement within an urban area. where you're not supposed to build on it. One of the other things that we found out that too is that they never realized that the river systems are corridors, and they're corridors for nutrients, which go from the top of the mountain to the ocean. They're a corridor for wildlife, in some cases, for birds and butterflies and bats. There are also sometimes transport corridors. If the river is deep enough, then you can have something like a banca on it going up and down, or a raft to carry your goods. They never looked at it upon as a corridor, an open corridor with the thing. So we helped introduce that idea, at least, so they'd be familiar with it. So it could be a very good space to bring nature down in through the city if it's well landscaped. There are many countries where they landscape the river system so that they actually become parks. But I think a lot of it is people don't understand, if I throw something away, maybe what they look upon is out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah.
So if I throw it away, it's gone. But they don't realize that it now is somebody else's problem when you throw it away. So there has to be a coordinated effort. We found out too that there also has to be a point person in each barangay that's helping to organize the activities if you're doing anything with the restoration. So there's a point source of information. Too many times they assume people absorb information if you listen to the radio and whatnot, but not everybody listens to the radio. Not everybody watches TV if they have a TV. So there are different modes, different media that you can use. But we found one in Bohol that worked very nicely is we had information boards in all of our barangays inside the protected landscape. And DNR put notices on it, we put notices on it, and everybody read it because it was usually near the barangay hall, which everybody visited at some point in time. So this is one way in which you can inform people, even if they may not be interested. Generally, they read what's on the board near the barangay hall. So information is critical because what you're going to do is you're going to build up a number of people so that what you eventually do, if you build enough people, the activity will keep going by itself. It doesn't need somebody pushing it like an NGO or a person within. It actually goes by itself. So they call that a critical mass. So what we try to do is work with a critical mass. It's somewhere around 35% of the population. If you can get them doing one thing, then the rest of the population will begin to mimic them and it will continue on its own. So again, it's an organization problem. Not so much the technology. We know what to do in a lot of cases, and we have good engineers in this country that can design things that will work in the river and whatnot and will help the industries. But it's an organizational aspect of the local people so that they get behind whatever you're doing.
Yes, I think also that it's good that you highlighted it because in the NGO work, in the work that we do, we're more concerned of it's not just about doing things. It's not just about doing things for people, but it's really empowering the communities to stand up for themselves and becoming aware of these kinds of rights. Both human rights, environmental rights, their constitutional rights, for that matter. In order for them to have idea on the things that we're trying to explain to them and guide them. Because yes, at the end of the day, it's really the communities who will be on the ground to continue the work that these are the NGOs would provide to these communities. And to add to your some of the things that you mentioned, so it's one is really the issue or the concern related to the lack of compliance of some of the barangays and even the citizens in the community of the materials recovery facility, which is mandated per barangay under the RA 9003 or the Ecological Solid Waste Management Act. And I remember, if I may share, in my environmental law class last semester, I would repeatedly mention to my students that, these the materials recovery facility, the segregation at source, the barangays and our families being the most basic unit in the society, and it's where segregation should start in order for proper making it a habit that whatever um, trash or whatever things that you have in your in your hand, you have to make sure that it's properly segregated so it doesn't go in a wrong in the wrong destination or something. So I would repeatedly mention that to my students so that they could also share that with their communities, with their families. Make a difference even if it's a small one, because I think that's what people fail to realize, that the small things that they do on a daily basis really goes a long way, especially if it's about conservation and protection of our environment.
Correct. With the one of the things that I've observed here is that they don't have a good polluter pays
Yes.
thing. I say this, and when I was in my older son lives in Jacksonville, Florida, in a small subdivision. But what happens is that the different trucks come around on different days, and one collects bottles and and other similar material, another time it's plastics and whatnot for the thing. If you have the wrong thing out there, they won't collect it. So it sits by the curb. But the interesting one is for water. They have a central system there for purifying the water, and the water goes out, it comes into your house. But they also have the pipe going back to the plant has a meter on it. So all of the gray water, what you use for your bath, for washing dishes, anything in the house where you collect the water and it goes into a drain, that water goes back through the system. But you're charged with that. And what my son found out is that he spends more paying for the dirty water than he does for the clean water coming in. And that money that for the dirty water goes to support the plant. So it's essentially self-sufficient. But everybody that sends any dirty water has to pay for it with a thing. So maybe eventually we might get to that system in here. But first I would try to get in a sewage treatment plant and system whereby all the households are hooked up to that, because there's so much water that's wasted here with the thing. And a lot of it goes into the Butuanan, and it doesn't stay there very long. It ends up in the Mactan Channel, and that's not helping the people who are eating the shellfish and digging the clams that are in the sandbars and whatnot with the thing. So, again, there's a lot. We're working. We've always had problems with the city because the garbage trucks that come along, we segregate and then they resegregate it back, and they dump it in and then take it to the dump site with the thing. So it doesn't help when you segregate. So finally, we stopped segregating, and they were just as happy to collect the garbage. In fact, they did it today with the thing. They collected our trash for the Monday, Wednesday, Friday. But the thing is, it has to be coordinated all along the line from the time you create the trash until the time you dispose of it, whether it's in a dump site or a recycling plant or whatever you have. It's got to be uniform. And if it isn't uniform, then it breaks down, and then people lose interest and they don't segregate, and then you end up with the same problem that you have right now.
Yes, that is correct. And we have the legal framework stating all these things. As a lawyer, sometimes it gets frustrating seeing all these provisions mandating people or mandating barangays, local government units to really produce or come up with a comprehensive plan on solid waste management. But eventually, if one arm or one aspect of that plan doesn't cooperate the way it's always it's supposed to be, then the plan doesn't work out perfectly. So there could be it's also good for people if they really practice the segregation at source. But yeah, as you mentioned, sometimes, along the way, whether it's in the sorting facility or during transport, eventually there are things that needs to be fixed related to that, especially here in Cebu City, because I think we are um, having some garbage crisis, given the fact that some of the landfills were closed. So there are local government units proposing for opening of landfills outside the city or outside the city center. So in other local government units outside the city, which is also not ideal because at some point we have to stop creating landfills and really work on promoting or lessening the waste that we produce, and ultimately hopefully we could achieve zero waste here, even if we start here at the city or in smaller barangays. So also, you mentioned about the polluter pays concept as an instructor of environmental law. It's also stated in our Clean Water Act, the Philippines. But again, there's a bit of a lapse in the implementation. There's also even the Environmental Guarantee Fund, which for the benefit of our televiewers would be a fund which is set up by the proponents of certain projects or industries which are set up in areas, especially if it has the likelihood of affecting water sources. So it's a fund in order to address some of these issues or some of these concerns or maybe problems which may arise out of these projects or which may affect the environment or the water source. But I really haven't had the opportunity of looking deeper into it, but hopefully these funds will be tapped, and there would be a strong legal regime on polluter pays, like you mentioned, because I think that's also a good initiative in order to push people to really follow our environmental laws.
Mhm. Well, one of the problems I've had too, from what I've read, is in dealing with DNR, when they find somebody, they find them for the activity that they've done. And a lot of times the amount is so small, it's like including it in your budget so that you can cover the costs of whatever you're doing, and then you go right back and do it. But one thing I don't understand is why the fines don't start from the start of the violation. And every day you're fined, not just one lump sum, but it's cumulative. Because that's to me is the real deterrent that has to be in there for the thing, because then it makes it very, very expensive if they continue or they try to hide whatever they're doing and they're discovered later, but they've been doing it, let's say, for 6 months, and then you just get one fine for that, rather than 180 days of fines, which is a much larger amount. So anyway, that's something I think that has to be worked on.
That's an interesting suggestion, and I think you mentioned also that that you're also working on some policy work with the Cebu City government, and maybe even the provincial government, especially with the recent drafting of the provincial water code.
Yeah, we actually worked on that for more than 3 years. I was part of the overall group. There were lots of us in the group. I think it was more than 20 people, and we did sections. I helped with the biodiversity, on freshwater biodiversity, on that part of it for making up the plan. It's very comprehensive. It's one of the few in the country now, I think, at the provincial level, but it's done by provincial people and representatives here, rather than having it done in Manila or written somewhere else and then imposed. So once we get that in, our next step is the implementing rules and regulations, which will be what you call the nitty-gritty of how we're going to implement it. That's going to take a while, but it'll be well worth the effort. And I'm just thankful that the current administration passed it, and now it's the law within, at least in the form that we had it with the thing, after many review sessions. but it's a very, very comprehensive document.
Yeah, it's also a good step of the Cebu province towards, protecting and conserving water resources, sustainable management of water resources, as well as coordinating with different agencies in order for a more effective way of, preserving our natural resources. Because the province of Cebu is really rich in natural resources, and most of these are greatly affected by, climate change, unregulated activities by different industries or corporations. And it's good that aside from the different ordinances of the municipalities and cities, the province is also stepping up and, putting together or drafting a provincial water code for Cebu, for the province of Cebu. So it's good that that's the direction the province is taking towards this concern related to the water issues or water conservation here in the province of Cebu.
I was going to say, everybody needs water. You can't do without it. And if you don't have it, life is going to be pretty miserable. So the quality of life goes down for everybody.
Yes, that is very true. And I think, especially here in the Philippines, that, we're surrounded by water. People rely on water for their livelihood, for sustenance, and many other things. It's really important that the government and the communities, the people in the community, would really make a priority, make it a point to center their actions toward protecting our water resources, especially that, we're in the era where there is already a scarcity of some of our resources, and we have to make sure that all these resources will still be available for the next generation, for the future generation, and not just something that we have to consume on this time and age.
Exactly, was the thing. The thing is that we Cebu, I think, had enough water up until this year, the thing. But after this, it becomes more scarce, so they'd have to turn to surface water, not just because they were over pumping the groundwater supply. But the thing is that, again, if you don't see it, we see the effects of the flooding, which is an indication of what our forests are like, or lack of forests. We see the result after a heavy rain, but you have people that all of a sudden they turn on their faucet and there's no water. So then they begin to worry about it. But as long as the water is flowing out of their faucet, they don't worry about where it's coming from or what the sustainability is of the water itself. Thing. So again, it's knowledge of the overall system, not just the place where you live, or the fact that if you're in a subdivision, I usually get water because I have a big tank that's storing it, and then I can fill it every day with the thing. So there are lots of different aspects here with it.
Yes, that's a lot of discussion. There are really a lot of aspects that needs further discussions on related to water and river conservation here in the city. But unfortunately, we're running out of time. And siguro just to wrap up and maybe summarize a little bit of our discussion this evening, you mentioned about the importance of education, and one of your recommendations earlier that, it's really important for barangay officials or people in the ground to have awareness and education on the different laws that they're supposed to implement and all the things, especially environmental laws on the ground. So maybe you could give us brief recommendation on the river situation and water conservation here in the city.
Okay, well, I think one thing that everybody has to remember is that we're dealing with a continuum for these rivers. They start in the mountains and they end at the seashore, but the effect, it goes out into the ocean. And unfortunately, I think a lot of people say, well, the people in the mountains that live there, they're the ones that are ruining the water source, so they should be doing this and doing that. Yet here I am in the urban area, the more level areas, and I'm pumping the water out like crazy. And so there has to be a realization that everybody has to pay for water. So MCWD, I think, covers about 40% of the, if I'm not mistaken, 40% of the wells here. The others are private wells. And as far as I'm concerned, everybody that has a well should be paying some kind of a user's fee, because the resource they're getting, they think is free. And that's your underground water supply. And it's not free. It's there for us to use, but to use wisely. So we still have to look at that aspect of it. The overpumping has to be brought into some kind of a control. And again, everybody down here that they say, oh, it's very expensive for, well, I think it's 15 meters per cubic meter, or 15 pesos per cubic meter. That's nothing. If you look at some of the poor people that buy it by the gallon or by the liter, they're paying up to 60 pesos per cubic meter. So why should they be paying that kind of price, yet the other ones that can afford it are only paying 15 pesos up to a certain amount? That's not the industrial rate, that's the local residential rate. So we have to look at that as far as water goes. But the thing is that we can clean up some of these rivers. It's not going to be a simple method. There's going to be lots of things that have to be in. You have to get the landscape architects to work with you. You have to get the engineers. You have to get the health people to work with you. But most of all, you need the residents to work with you. And that means micro-planning maybe at the situ level, of bringing up to the barangay level, and then bringing up to the municipal level or city level, depending upon where you are. But there also needs to be cooperation. If in the case of the Botswanan, half of it is in Cebu City and half of it's in Mandawi. So you've got to get the governments of both to work together in order to solve a common problem, because I'm sorry to say the water does not recognize political boundaries. So it goes where it is, where the least resistance is. And sometimes it's down the river, sometimes it's down the road if there's a flood, but eventually it reaches the ocean. So people have to be aware of that. And what we do as individuals and as communities greatly affects the quality of the water, as well as the amount that's available to us. But it also affects the aesthetic value of the water overall. And when it gets to the ocean, it mixes with the salt water. And from there, it goes on into a much larger system, but it circulates. So it rains, it drops on the land, goes back again. So it's a cycle which we can help improve in the land side of it. But if we don't, and climate change is going to change a lot of the way in which we receive the water. So I think people have to understand that it's supposedly, from what I understand, you're going to get heavy rains. They're going to be more intensive, but they may not be as frequent. We're lucky now because we're at the tail end of a La Nina and whatnot. So it's amazing to me. It's still raining in March like this with the thing. So we're blessed with the water for as long as the Mother Nature puts it on in the form of rainfall. But this will not last. It's going to get hot again. So we have to remember that that's coming along. And climate change, go ahead, the thing.
Yeah, that's really important that you highlighted climate change. And this is a very interesting discussion, and we thank you for the recommendations and the effort of SWCF, especially in water conservation and river rehabilitation in Cebu. And I hope that even with the pandemic, this will not stop us with in terms of the projects that we're doing and the work that we do in the communities. And unfortunately, we're running out of time, Bill. It's really an interesting discussion about water conservation, river rehabilitation, and I think there would still be a lot of avenues wherein we could share more information about the river situation here in the city to more people, not just our televiewers. So thank you so much, Bill, for participating and agreeing to be our special guest for this episode of Partners in Law. And we hope that, with the coordination of the different CSOs and the local government units here in the city, and even in outside the city, the province of Cebu, will be able to make a difference in terms of water conservation and ensuring that all these resources are available for us and for the future generation. So this is the end of our episode for this evening. So thank you so much, Bill, for sharing with us your thoughts and insights related to water conservation.
Thank you, Kristine. I enjoyed the conversation. If you need any help, you have my number, just call.
Yes, and if you, where can we reach the Soil and Water Conservation Foundation? Are you on social media, or where can
we have a Facebook page? We tried a website and it crashed 3 or 4 times, so we've gone with Facebook. More people read Facebook, I think, than the website. So we're on the website. My wife regularly adds things to it for the thing. So that's the easiest way to reach us now.
So thank you so much. And for all our televiewers, you could also watch episodes of Partners in Law through our YouTube channel, Partners in Law-Telia, for other episodes with Philippine Earth Justice Center and all other organizations discussing environmental laws here in the So daghang salamat, Bill. Thank you to our televiewers, and we'll see you again next time. Thank you.